Okay guys, this week's video is going to be all about pumpkins. I am going to be making a couple different things with pumpkin. So these are two small pumpkins that they are labeled pie pumpkins. When you buy them, yes, you could bake any kind of pumpkin, but the ones that are specifically labeled for pies definitely work the best. So I baked these at 400 for about 90 minutes, and then I left them cool for a couple hours. And the only thing I did before I baked them was poke a couple holes around the top, and I cleaned them. So you'll know when they're done because they'll be soft and the stem will be easy to remove. You can actually just peel them. The chickens will be so happy for that. So now that I've got the pumpkin peeled and all the seeds and the innards removed, I'm going to blend it. It's still warm. The best time to blend it is when it's still warm, because then you don't need to add any excess liquids. Which, if you have to add liquids, it could make your baked goods more runny. Sometimes we tend to, or I used to think that my baked goods did not turn out as well when I used home cooked pumpkin, because the consistency of the canned pumpkin was much firmer than what I could get my home cooked pumpkin, because I was cooking them in water. But since I've started baking them, there's no excess water. Now I have a lot better luck with using homegrown pumpkins for my pumpkin baking, because it's drier, more like what you buy from the store in the tin cans. So the next thing I do is I use my strainer and some cheesecloth, and I strain any remaining liquid from my pumpkin. Moving on to making my pie crust so that I can make my pumpkin pies. And I will link the recipe to my pie crust in the description. So of course I'm gonna start with the pies first, since pies are my very favorite thing to make. I always kind of finish forming my dough and kneading it a little tiny bit as I roll it, because you don't want to be too rough with it or it'll be real tough. And I'd rather have it a little sticky than have it be too dry. You can always add more flour, but you can't take flour out. You can see I made this one way too big because I'm used to using my bigger glass pie plates. But since we'll be traveling, I'm going to use the disposable ones so that I don't have to worry about bringing dishes back home. So I made 4 fruit pies, and those are in the freezer. Those I will bake the day before Thanksgiving. And I wanted to show you what my pumpkin puree looks like. So I strained about 4 cups of liquid out of this, and it's much thicker now. So we are ready to make the pumpkin pies. So I've got my 3 cups of pumpkin in the blender, and I'm gonna add 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of brown sugar. I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and then 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and I'm adding 4 whole eggs. Putting in my quart of milk, and then my 1/2 cup of flour. Somehow I missed the filming of blending all the ingredients, but just blend it until it's all incorporated.
Pumpkin pie! Oh, you actually got it then?
I gutted the pumpkins. So when I bake pumpkin pies, I set my timer for an hour, and then after an hour I start checking them, and once they seem firm all the way through and have tiny cracks on the top, then I know they're done. And our baked pumpkin pies went in the freezer beside our unbaked fruit pies. So next I'm gonna mix up my pumpkin roll, the batter to make the pumpkin roll, because I want to put it in the oven as soon as the pumpkin pies are done, so that I utilize the hot oven in the best possible way. So the recipe calls for 3 well-beaten eggs, and you'll see me make a double recipe, but I'm gonna link the printable recipe in the description. So next I'm gonna add my pumpkin. And then the sugar. And then the baking soda and the baking powder. Then we're gonna add our cinnamon and our salt, our vanilla, and finally the flour. And then we're gonna take our whisk and just whisk it all together until it's smooth. So I'm using a jelly roll pan, and I'm lining it with parchment paper, and on the parchment paper I'm going to put some oil to keep the pumpkin roll from sticking to the parchment paper. So then, because I made a double recipe, I'm going to put exactly half of my batter in this jelly roll pan, and I'm gonna spread it out. It gets pretty thin. There's not a lot of batter in one recipe of pumpkin roll. My pumpkin roll is all done baking, and I want to flip it onto this kitchen towel. So I'm sprinkling the kitchen towel with powdered sugar, and this will keep the pumpkin roll from sticking to the towel. So while the pumpkin roll is still hot, I'm gonna flip it right onto my powdered sugar, and then I'm just gonna peel that parchment paper off. And then I'm gonna also sprinkle this side with some powdered sugar. And now I'm gonna take my towel and start rolling the still warm pumpkin roll. And this kind of trains the pumpkin roll on what shape I want it to keep. And I'll just put it in the refrigerator to cool, just like that. So I ran out of energy yesterday, and I didn't get the filling for the pumpkin roll made, so they chilled overnight. But this morning, we are going to make the cream cheese filling and unroll them, roll them up with the cream cheese filling, and then we're going to freeze them before we slice them. So I really didn't intend to melt my butter that hard. I just wanted to soften it a bit. But I've got my butter and my cream cheese in there. I'm going to cream that together. So I've got my cream cheese and my butter all creamed together. I'm gonna add my 2 cups of powdered sugar and my teaspoon of vanilla. Now you have to remember I'm making a double recipe, so one thing that my mom and my grandma taught me is anything that gets sugar and vanilla needs salt. So even when the recipe doesn't ask for salt, I add 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt into all my frostings and fillings. So now you're just gonna whip all the ingredients together until they are nice and fluffy. And now I'm gonna take my pumpkin roll that's cool and flip it onto some tin foil. I'm using tin foil because I want to put the pumpkin roll into the freezer once I've got the filling in it. And then I'm just going to take my cream cheese filling and spread it evenly over the entire pumpkin roll. And then I'm just going to take the pumpkin roll and roll it all back up. And then I'm gonna wrap it up in that tin foil so that I can tuck it into the freezer. So now that the pumpkin roll has been in the freezer for about 8 hours, we are going to slice it. I am going to store the pumpkin roll in the freezer. It does not freeze very solid, so I will get it out just hours before I want to serve it. So here I've got my oil and my eggs and my brown sugar, and I'm just gonna cream that together until it's nice and creamy. You can see how that changed color as it got creamy. I'm gonna add my pumpkin. I've got 1.5 cups of pumpkin. So I've got 1.5 teaspoon of salt. I've got 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. And I've got 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. Got 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. Got 1 teaspoon of cloves and 1/2 teaspoon of ginger. So I've got 1 2 3/4 cups of flour. And then I'm gonna add my 1/2 cup of cold water. So I'm going to spoon out 2 cookies and bake those to make sure I don't need to add more flour to my batter. So I baked these 2 and they look perfect. So I don't think I need to add any more flour. I'm just gonna go ahead and bake the rest of the batch. Now the thing to remember is if you are using canned pumpkin, like tin can pumpkin from the grocery store, yours are gonna look a lot darker than mine do because the pumpkins that I use were a real light colored variety. So one of the reasons that I use parchment paper for whoopie pies is because you want to let them cool just a tiny bit before you remove them. And I only have 3 cookie sheets, so I can't let them stay on the hot cookie sheets because I want to keep baking. So I can just slide the parchment paper off and then I can let them cool. And then they come off of the parchment paper much better when they're a tiny bit cool. If I try to get them off right after they're done baking, they'll just break. So now for the filling for the whoopie pies, I've linked a couple different recipe options for you in the description of this video. I'm going to wrap each of these cookies individually before I freeze them. And I'm going to put these directly in the freezer and then we will eat them at Thanksgiving. So I've got these all wrapped up, ready for the freezer. And these are for the kids' snack when they come home from school. And you could keep these in the freezer for up to a month this way.
rest is in there.
Kendra, do you care to just have the